This is a program that was started in part because I had started a IG Instagram live series, and that just concluded, but it was 5 weeks of conversations with lots of creatives. And unfortunately, a couple of those conversations did not get recorded. When one of them was Susan MB Chen. And Susan, being so kind and so generous with her practice, said, I would love to do something on Zoom, because I personally think Zoom is just a better format to show artists' work. And she said, but maybe I could do it as a conversation with other Asian American artists. And I thought that was brilliant because during my conversations with curators and thinkers and artists over those 5 weeks, there was a lot of concern from Asian American artists that they felt targeted, they felt scared, that this time of COVID-19 and the rhetoric in this country was really doing some damage to the relationships and the way that Asian Americans were feeling in this country. So I have relationships with a lot of Asian American artists, and I felt that it was time to really do a conversation with some of them and see where we all stand, how we're feeling, and what kind of action steps we want to take going forward, because we don't want to just be complacent. We don't want to let other people do the work for us. I think we're here and ready to do the work. So the three artists that I put together are not ironically, coincidentally, all about the same age. They're all 28, 29 years old, which I wasn't planning for, but it just turned out that way. They all happen to be from New York City right now, but they come from different parts of the country and different parts of the world originally. And they come from different perspectives. So one thing I also want to highlight is that, Asian Americans or the Asian diaspora is not a monolith. We are all different and we have different perspectives, but we are kind of facing discrimination at a point when our country just really needs to be held together more closely. So I'm hoping that today is a conversation where we are going to look at three different practices from these artists, all of whom have looked at identity from their works and looked at it in their very own practices. They're all different media, which I love. Susan's a painter, Andrew's a photographer, and Divya is going to show us her multimedia work and a video game that she created. And also, I encourage all of you to put questions in the chat, because we're going to have room for that at the end. And I think what we want to try and get out of this at the end is a set of action steps that we want to take as a community of artists and community of people who are supportive of artists and who recognize that art is a reflection of our society, it's a reflection of our times, and how are we able to drive that forward, help institutions see Asian American artists in a more in more light. How do we drive the conversation, and how do we kind of collaborate with each other in ways that maybe we didn't look at before? So and the other thing I want to say is that this is a conversation that is built on respect and built on, like I said, collaboration. So I don't think I have to say it, but I'm just going to say it because, who knows what happens, but please be respectful. Anyone who is appearing to be disruptive or attempts to disrupt the conversation, we will have the right to remove you from the conversation or from this session. And I hope that everyone continues to look into the work of these three artists and also join our other two talks that are coming up this week. Tomorrow is with the curator Sarah Raza and the artist James Clark and Shapur Puyan. And then on Thursday is Sarah Raza again with the artist Yng-Ru Shimojo, who is on this session as well. So I am going to get started. And I'm going to start with Divya. And Divya Gadangi, who is the artist based out of Brooklyn, New York. And she is, actually, I'm going to read you her bio. Give me 1 second. Divya is a New York City-based South Asian American artist exploring instances where humor and hopelessness overlap. She finds objects or moments that generate an odd friction of opposing feelings like repulsion and entertainment, and asks viewers to consider the value of these confusing experiences. Her range of work includes video, sculpture, print, and digital mixed media, and also food. So I love the food element because, you know, to be Asian and to love food is basically the same.
Yeah.
Um, so Divya, I'm going to start your presentation. Just give me 1 second while I share the screen.
Sure.
Okay. Here we go. All right. So Divya, tell us about this work. Please maintain your original Indian beauty. What I was going to do is, do you want to do the preview first, or do you want to go through these slides first?
Let's do the preview first.
Okay.
So this is just a trailer for a video game.
Do you want to give us a...
Sure.
Here it
Sure.
is.
So I made this in 2014. It's a game that you can walk through and explore, and what you'll come across are these text messages that are kind of these big sculptures that are floating in space that have words on them, and these text messages are real text that my mom sent me when I dyed my hair a lighter color of brown. And she's really, really angry and really, really disappointed with me. There's also what we're seeing right now are moments, important hair moments in the three homes that I grew up in when I was a kid. And yeah, I think this game or explorable environment, there really is no goal to the game besides walking around and thinking about what you're being approached with. But yeah, I think this is sort of like what I would have made if I had institutional money to to have a show in a gallery, to try to put these texts on a pedestal and have them be blown up and big. So that's, yeah.
Cool. And then here, let's go to your slideshow. Hold on. So this is, these are just stills of the work. And do you want me to just keep going?
Sure. Yeah, I think these are just moments that were maybe a little bit more poignant, maybe interesting, or, you know, like the bio that Yng read out says, it's like a mixture of funny but also extremely sad. And kind of, again, like sitting in that moment and figuring out what it means to you.
And this work is from 2014?
Yeah, 2014.
Okay, and you showed this at a film or a art festival.
Yeah, I had gotten a grant, which was great, to make this in 2014, and part of the deal was to present it at Lumen Festival, which is, I think, one of the biggest projection festivals. It's actually in Staten Island, which is where I'm from. And yeah, I showed it in like a shipping container, and it was really good and really fun and nice to get out into the world.
And so these are all text messages from your mother, and they reflect the relationship that you have with her as, you know, a young Asian American. I assume your parents are first generation immigrants.
Yeah, I'm what you call, I think, 1.5 generation. So I was born kind of on their way from India to the U.S. by way of Iran and England.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think this piece and this moment in time for me was a lot about hair as a symbol for forsaking my Indian identity. The name of the piece is "Please Maintain Your Original Indian Beauty." That's an actual text that my mom sent to me, and I think she was beyond disappointed that I was dyeing my hair and saw it as a symbol of me no longer being Indian and now choosing to be American. One of the blobs, I think, one of the most, I don't know, poignant, I guess, again, text was, to me, did you bleach your face as well? And yeah, I think it's in very plain words, she's asking me if I've forsaken my Indianness, and I think hair is a symbol of that is really interesting and weird to me.
Right. I'm sorry, I'm moving to the, I don't mean to do this. I'm just trying to get out of my screen. I wanted to go back to, okay, well, we'll just stay here. But at what point did you decide you were going to create a video work out of a text message from your mother or a series of them? I mean, you presumably get texts from your mom all the time.
Yeah.
So, some of them are probably super mundane, but some are, I assume, also fraught with kind of intergenerational, issues. Why this one? Why was this so essential to you as something that could inspire a work of art?
Yeah, I think the barrage of texts from her was probably the most alarming to me and the most okay, this is a moment that I won't forget. The also I mean, it was shocking, as we talked about before, like being from an Asian American family it's a mix of harmony and disharmony. There are moments of strangeness and friction, and I think anything to highlight that, I think, is great. And I think making it into a video game, I did sit with this for a long time before deciding to make it a video game. I think my main goal was, again, like blowing it up, putting it on a pedestal and calling attention to it, I think was the goal. And I think, again, like would have loved to have done this in a gallery, but there was something about walking through this space, this fake space, and coming upon the text yourself that felt appropriate and kind of mimicked my, how my experience with receiving those messages.
Has your mom seen this work?
She has not.
Oh, really?
She has not. I have not.
Why? Do you fear that it's like, I mean, do you keep this identity very separate from your family?
I keep this identity extremely separate from my family, and especially this piece, I think, caused a big rift in my relationship with her. And then in recent years, it has been so much better, so much better. And it just feels like not a necessary thing to talk about. That might be me being complacent or self-preservation-y. I don't know what that is, but it doesn't feel right yet.
Do other members of your family know about this work?
My sister does.
Wow.
Yeah, my sister.
So wait, so this showed at a festival on Staten Island, which is where you are from.
Yeah.
So how did you keep that participation in the festival a secret as well?
I did. It's weird to have a double life.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think a couple years later, I had a show, I was part of a group show in Staten Island, and they had read about it in the newspaper, and there was a screenshot from the game. It's just my mom and I from like a VHS tape. It's like an animation, and all she said was, I see that I'm on the wall, or something like that. And I said, yes, you are. And that's basically it.
Wow. All right. Well, then, I think this is a nice segue into the next piece, which this is well, I'll let you describe it, but you did donate this to a fundraiser that I organized for a Museum of Chinese in America following the devastating fire that it had. And I'm really happy to say that another awesome artist, I won't name her name, but she's incredible, and she bought the work. So I love that it went to another artist. But tell us about this piece.
Yeah, I think this is now becoming a common trend in my work, and I think for this calls, and I don't want to generalize, but I do think that as an Asian American, I feel that there's a tension between my family and myself, not knowing, and my father's not passed away. I feel like the title kind of alludes that my dad, I don't know him. I do know my dad, I do know my mom. I'm very close with them actually, but I have not been able to have difficult conversations with them, and whether that's a common immigrant story or not, I don't know. But I could not recall which village my dad was from.
In
So
India.
in India, yeah, and I was between two places, and I totally could have called him and asked him, but that seemed extremely embarrassing, and that was not doing my job as being a good immigrant daughter, to carry on his legacy and to know everything that there is about him and everything about his journey. And it
Mm-hmm.
felt that felt really shitty.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a really emotional kind of journey through Google Maps. Like, could this be where he's from? Well, that doesn't match the stories that
Mm-hmm.
he's told me. And then also there's another layer that's a little bit more personal, which is that my dad is a bit of a storyteller, and like, is this true? What, I don't know if was this the tall tale that he told.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think that this image kind of like zeroing in on potentially where he's from, never, I feel like I might not ever know what his life was before me. um, and yeah, I think that's the piece.
And I assume also your father has not seen this work.
Yeah.
Do you envision a time where you will feel ready to share these artworks with your family?
I think I can. I think Taj Mahal's, which I think we're going to talk about soon.
Yeah, we can go to that.
Which, I've called it my most pop project and my most accessible project. um, is something that I'm able to share with them, and is kind of been, by share I mean I'm exploiting them because it's my
Well,
mom.
so this is kind of it's a food work, but it's also performative. It's interactive. I've participated in it, meaning that I have eaten the balls, the delicious meatballs. But you make them as their family recipes, correct?
Yeah, they're family recipes. They're maybe two of them are adapted, but yeah, they're my grandma's recipes for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this is something that I've gotten used to sharing the moment with them.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's serving the meatballs in person and also cooking them together. And I think it's
Mm-hmm.
become a really, it will potentially be this entry point for me to be able to discuss
Yeah.
other work and other thoughts that I have on being their kid and being alive.
Uh, no, I love it. All right. Well, I'm going to stop the share. I, I think it's interesting that you have been so honest with the fact that you are not. Um, oh, it's
But
interesting that you've been so honest about the fact that you aren't ready to share these works with your families, with your parents yet. And I honestly don't think that that is unusual. But let's go to Andrew, who is next, and I'll read you his bio real quick. But is that someone's music? What is that? Do you guys hear that? Is that me? Oh, that's the Vimeo. That was the Vimeo scrolling. Sorry, guys. All right, so now we're going to go to Andrew Kung. Andrew is a photographer based in Brooklyn with roots in San Francisco. Through his images, his aim is to create a utopia where Asian American beauty is a normalized beauty. In his first fashion narrative photo book called The All American, he explored the invisibility and masculinity of Asian American men. It premiered in major media outlets, including CNN Style and Paper Magazine, among many others. His commercial clients include Beats by Dre, HBO, Google, Esquire, and Chase. And another cool thing about Andrew is that we didn't realize this, but we have a mutual friend who was supposed to be married today,
yeah,
and the wedding was canceled, obviously. But here, our Andrew and I meeting
Here we are. I know.
today.
Oh,
So Andrew, why don't you introduce yourself and I will prepare your slideshow.
sure. So my name is Andrew. I grew up in the beautiful city of San Francisco. I took a bit of an unconventional path to becoming a photographer that I am today. I started off in undergrad business school at Berkeley, worked in Silicon Valley and tech at LinkedIn for about 3 years before fully transitioning to freelance photography about 3 years ago. It's been a fun, amazing journey as a photographer. Started off, purely commercial, but started discovering kind of my voice as I did my first documentary project in Mississippi about a small Chinese population along the Mississippi Delta. And that project kind of helped me dive deeper into my own Asian American identity. I read a lot more literature, engaged more with the community here in New York, and stumbled my way upon really investigating the invisibility of Asian Americans and also the masculinity of Asian American men. So that's kind of what led to this piece, the All-American, where I'll talk about 5 images from the project. All these images are very set design centric and very narrative. So it's not just a beautiful fashion image, but they're images with settings and scenes that have a lot of meaning. To kind of start off, this first image and the next image is really a diptych that really contrasts the experience of my friend Jeffrey, who is a drag artist in LA. And this is his bedroom. So he was telling me, as a drag artist, the moment he puts on his drag persona, he becomes a fetishized Asian American woman who's seen as exotic from the East and from Asia. And the moment that he, is his kind of normal Asian man self, and in this image, he says all of a sudden, when he walks down the street, he gets comments about how he's desexualized and emasculated and has a lot of experiences in which we shared during this photo shoot. And so with this image, I wanted to really create that sense of vulnerability and intimacy in these images and really provide a contrast both through the use of black and white and through color, to really showcase the two almost spectrums of stereotypes that Jeffrey has to endure. And it's such an interesting intersection of, gender, identity, and sexuality, really all captured in the intimacy and vulnerability of his own bedroom. So that was one of the spreads in the All-American. This next image was an image that I wanted to paint of any Asian American kind of student growing up, and the locker was a very formative kind of experience for a lot of my Asian American peers. A lot of the things that we'll talk about are things like the lunchbox experience and the lunchbox moments, and I want to allude to that with some of the Asian snacks and the lunchbox and the stuff that my mom would pack me for school. And that lunchbox moment that a lot of my friends, really experienced was when other people, non-Asians, would really make a comment about how the Asian food looks or smells. That's part of the experience of feeling like the other, or feeling invisible, or feeling that you're not American enough, or that you don't belong just based on your food and also your experience, Asian American experience. And the other things that I put in the locker were just kind of subtle symbols of books like How to American Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, all books that I personally read in high school as well. And I felt like I really resonated with, even though it didn't talk about necessarily Asian American topics, but talked a lot about, invisibility in the African American community. And also subtle kind of, not really subtle, but I remember in high school, a lot of my friends would have different tapings on their lockers. And I noticed that a lot of these Asian American men always had white women as kind of the all-American ideal, in terms of showcasing what all-American beauty was. And so I was really trying to investigate why that was and why that was the norm. So this kind of painting and setting really was that high school kind of moment, or kind of middle school moment that a lot of Asian American men, but Asian Americans would have in general.
Andrew, is this individual someone you know personally, or did you seek out subjects?
Yeah, so these are all friends of mine personally. They're all people that I personally connect with, and the beautiful part of the project is that, you know, they're all friends, so we all talk about our experiences as Asian Americans, as Asian American men. And I think that's what made the project so much stronger, is the intimacy between me and the subject. And I really wanted to represent, you know, all different spectrums of the kind of Asian American community when it came to men, and representing, you know, the queer community, representing South Asians, Southeast Asians, and not just having this monolithic view of heteronormative kind of East Asians.
Yeah. Talk to me about this image.
Yeah, so this image is the last image in my book. The title is called Times Are Changing. The story that I wanted to paint with this image was that there is some sort of momentum, you know, that's happening with the Asian American community now. You know, ever since Crazy Rich Asians and a few different Netflix shows, we are starting to see more representation of the nuances and representation of different communities within the Asian American communities. And the model or the subject in this image is Alexander Hodge, who is an actor on HBO's Insecure. And he is the one Asian actor on the show. And his role isn't one that is representative of the stereotypical roles that Asian American men played, which is, you know, the nerd or the sidekick. But his role really was one of the first roles in which I've seen that I'm like, wow, okay, so Asian American men are not perceived as how they were before in like Mickey Rooney's, you know, depictions in the early days of cinema. And so this image, what I wanted to do is show him as a leading figure of this change. And also one of his favorite films, we were talking before the shot, is Better Luck Tomorrow with John Cho. And it was one of the formative pieces of cinema and film with a predominantly Asian cast that I watch and I love, and it's one of my favorite films. So I wanted to put that and put them in this kind of vintage all-American set where you're not used to seeing Asian Americans in.
Cool. So you built the set for this image?
Yeah, so this set was a place that I found in Ridgewood, Queens.
Oh, wow.
And built the set from scratch with just me, my assistants, and our stylist. And we want to be really intentional with the clothes that we use. Those clothing from Prabal Gurung.
Oh, nice.
One of the most famous Asian fashion designers today. And so really wanted to construct every detail of the piece to almost light the setting as if it were, you know, a Wong Kar-wai film as well.
And that's what I was thinking. It looks so like, it looks like a Wong Kar-wai image. It's beautiful.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So yes, every piece was so intentional in what I wanted to construct and what I wanted to communicate with this image. Definitely took a lot of work on the production end to get everything together, but it's definitely one of my favorite images from the series.
And this is the last one that you'll talk about. Yeah.
So this is the cover of my book, The All-American. And with this setting, I wanted to also create a very all-American environment, an environment that references, you know, my kind of room growing up and having posters on the wall. But I wanted to put it in a very all-American environment because when you think of an all-American, oftentimes you don't think of an Asian American man or a kid. You think about a white person typically. And so I wanted to specifically put an Asian person in that environment. And I wanted to put up a few of the people that I looked up to personally growing up. And it just shows that there were only really a handful of people that even Asian American kids can look up to today. You know, there aren't really that many levels of representation that we see. So even when there are levels of representation, we see films like Dragon Ball Evolution, which you have on the wall, but they casted a white lead character instead of an Asian character for, you know, an Asian film or an Asian kind of cartoon that I watched growing up. And so that kind of alluded to also this feeling of invisibility and otherness, because even when we did look up to people, they would be casted, or actors would be casted who are not even Asian or Asian American. And so I wanted to allude to that level of invisibility and otherness in this type of setting and in this type of environment, and almost have a subtle kind of like American flag there as well in black and white.
So this was also a set. This isn't.
Yeah.
You didn't go into this guy's room and it looked like that.
No, yeah. So this is also a set.
It's all very intentional. Got it.
Yeah, everything was very intentional, which is why the entire series took about 8 months to produce and shoot. But it was such a amazing experience for myself to really think through each element of the image and to really think through what I want to say. And the most rewarding part of this project was really to hear all of these people reaching out over Instagram or email and just saying, thank you so much for, representing some of these stories and experiences that I felt as an Asian American man growing up. And I've never seen, a fashion photographer talk about these types of issues. And I think that was the most rewarding part, to feel like I can give voice to invisible communities, to our community, and to be elevating some of these narratives in the photo world and in the fashion world as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
So the last artist we're going to hear and see from is Susan MB Chen. Here's a little brief bio before she talks about herself as well. But Susan is a first-generation Asian American born in Hong Kong. She paints portraits of her racial community to investigate the psychology of race and the varying viewpoints her sitters have on ideas of home, immigration, prejudice, identity, family, longing, love, and loss. She usually finds her sitters, who are strangers, on various community social media groups on the internet. In 2019, she was a finalist for the AXA Art Prize. Since vacating her studio at Columbia University, she is sheltering at her New York apartment and painting in her 9 by 12-foot living room. And I will say some of Susan's paintings are basically 9 by 12, so working with a lot. All right, Susan, I'm going to start yours, and you can start talking about yourself, girl. Let me see. I think someone's trying to join. Okay.
Great.
Is this the first one, Susan? Okay.
Totally.
Hi, tell us about yourself briefly.
Yeah, well, I am supposed to be graduating in 3 days, but the pandemic means that, also I'm an MFA student right now at Columbia, but I don't think we'll be graduating till 2021. So it was interesting to be kind of like thrown out of the studio 6 weeks before your thesis show. But anyway, for the past year, I've been painting these portraits of essentially like Asian Americans, just in like New York City and like the local neighborhoods. And I was first inspired to do this actually because someone had added me to this Facebook group, Subtle Asian Traits, which I'm probably sure like a lot of you are aware of or in it, but it's a Facebook group with over 1.7 million Asian millennials who live across the diaspora in the West. From the States to Canada to Australia and Europe. And it was a really powerful moment in that, this was a space where people found community. Like I have a friend who is from like Kokomo, Indiana, and, in a space like that, sometimes you're not able to find a lot of other Asian Americans to connect with. And so it was really great to see how people from all pockets across the diaspora were finding ways to share their stories with each other. So I would find my sitters on these community social media groups. For example, like I found some sitters on like Subtle Asian New York, Chinatowns of New York City, Asian American Alliance. And I would share these like posts being like, I'm looking for sitters to come to the studio. And it was really interesting because when people did show up at my studio, I'd ask them like, how did they see my posts? And some people had like mentioned that they saw on like a bulletin board in a local community. And so that meant like that people were like printing out my posts to stick on places like that I didn't even know about. And I thought that was really cool. So because these sitters are not like professional models, so they'd come to my studio for 5 hours. And, essentially people find it very hard to sit in silence for that long. I don't blame them. I wouldn't be able to do it either. So they would basically like talk throughout the whole thing. And sometimes I would feel like a performance artist, kind of like Gordon Ramsay with a chef table, but a paint table instead. And so it's like kind of like putting on a show. It's like, oh, I'm a painter, and they're like sitting there. There's like a bit of this weird pressure. And then other times I would feel like I'm a bit of a therapist. And, I'm not like a trained psychologist. And so people like would tell me about all their problems. And sometimes, I'm just like, oh, it's your horoscope. You're in Mercury retrograde this month or something.
Were people like, was it similar to like Divya saying, I can't share my professional parts of my life with my parents because I'm afraid they won't understand. I mean, did you see a lot of generational anxiety or confusion?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely, intergenerational conflicts between parents and like our millennial generation kind of thing. But also just like issues with people's daily lives, like, people looking for a job or, in conflict with like their spouse or something like that. But my favorite part of it all is asking people what their dreams are. I feel like because I'm an artist and you guys are too, it's like we're basically living our dream. And for a lot of the sitters, they have like 9-to-5 jobs. And so, yeah, it's interesting to me to like hear about what people's desires are.
Right.
And I think that's why I like to put like this symbol of the landscape in a lot of these like windows outside. It's kind of like this I am here but I'd rather be there kind of feeling with
Right, because
I think a lot of
all your landscapes are made up. They're not representations of the actual outdoors.
sometimes they are like
Okay.
in the painting before where there's like a cactus garden, the girl was telling me how she used to like play in these cactus gardens with her little brother growing up.
But you imagined that for her, right? Like she wasn't actually sitting in front of the cactus garden.
Totally.
Right.
Totally.
So you were creating exterior environments to kind of go with the conversations and the lives that you heard.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just love, when Susan and I first met, it was at the Spring Break Art Fair. And I think people were just blown away by the verve, the boldness of the paintings. And I was really surprised. I did a studio visit with her not long after. And Susan, you told me that you just started painting portraits.
Yeah,
Talk to us about that.
It's funny because people think I'm like some expert portrait painter. And I'm like, I've only been really doing this like during my MFA. But basically, I just wanted to do, like, I had been painting these landscapes for so long. And I think they have so much to do with like longing and wanting to be like, constantly living in this duality of space, which I think a lot of Asian Americans feel. But I really wanted to do something that was like the total opposite during my time in school. And I always felt like the landscape was a place of like running away, and portraits were so much about running towards because the person is like right there. You can't really escape them.
Yeah.
But I know I'm like running out of time, so I'll just really quickly go through the next few paintings. This was a painting that was inspired by this race and ethnicity class I took at Columbia in the Asian Americans studies, where I got to work with Professor Shin Hee Han, who actually wrote the book Racial Melancholia. That was really cool. It's based on this documentary that these 4 Asian American Barnard women made in 1995, where they talk about all these like issues that Asian American students faced at the time, which, things like family and cultural conflicts, interracial marriage, mental health, like talking about queerness. And this is 1995, but it just like watching it today in 2020, I was like, wow, the issues are exactly the same. And so I made this painting also based on like, it's like 4 girls, similar to like the 4 girls in the movies, but they're like real life humans. And I just wanted to mark it as like a milestone. And I hope in like 2045, like our conversations would be different. And then the next painting is, I got really invested in Yang Gang. Like Andrew Yang is cool, but Yang Gang is like really a magical phenomenon. And you can go next. So I found my sitters on like the New York City Yang Gang social media group, but also like through like these different rallies that I was going to. And not a lot of Asian Americans run for president every day. So I thought it was really like, it's a really exciting time to be alive.
Right.
And also like this group painting required like assembling, like all these sitters didn't know each other until the painting. And so I don't know, I thought it was cool because I felt like it was pushing group portraiture in art history in like just moving the needle like a tiny bit. And then you can go next. And then so since the pandemic, I've just been painting in my living room. And so I had a whole calendar of sitters lined up, and I lost all my sitters. So I've had to like paint myself, which I've been avoiding for so long. But it's funny because you stare at yourself in the mirror for so long and you're like, those are new moles.
Yeah. But I love it. I think that they're so representative of the times. The toilet paper on the background and the CNN. I mean, yeah, they are, it's like a little time capsule.
Yeah. It's been fun.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. So we're going to have just a brief conversation with all three artists. And again, if you have any thoughts in the chats, then we're going to get to that at the very end. But I wanted to hear from the three of you because, this is really the first time that all three of you have seen each other's work. And as visual artists who are, of this Asian diaspora, what do you take from what you've seen? Divya, I'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, I think representation, and I think kind of highlighting actual other human beings' point of views and experiences is something that my work lacks a lot. Mine is very like introspective and my own personal experience. So I think what the two of you are doing by getting out there, talking to people, hearing about their experiences, relating to one another, not relating to one another, I think is very special and nice. Doing good work.
Oh, your story about not telling your parents, it reminded me, so when I was applying for MFA, my parents thought it meant master's in financial accounting. Oh. And then after I got there, I was like, psyched! And yeah, I just remember in undergrad, my parents like really did not want me to major in art or be an artist or fall down that rabbit hole. And so it actually prevented me from taking any art classes till like junior year of college. And then, so I decided like really last minute that I was still gonna do it. So I had to like take all my classes in the winter and the summer. But then it leaves me like, I'm like curious with Andrew, like what your parents think of your work too. Especially because I've noticed like there are a lot of issues between like generations or like Asian families when it comes to issues of like queerness and mental health. And I feel like your work highlights so much about that. But like every family is different.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think my parents in general have been just very supportive and open-minded and understanding to a lot of not just a lot of issues in the world, but like especially when it comes to me. So even when I told them I was making a transition away from Silicon Valley, from a nice business degree, it's kind of like every Asian parent's dream, right? It's like to take a step away from that and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to be a photographer now. And for them to be really open-minded and supportive, I think really is a testament to their kind of ideals and their values, which I'm very grateful for. But yeah, in terms of their receptiveness to my work, like they've really taken the time to digest all the images, all the narratives, look up certain things, online that don't make sense. I think
do you think, Andrew, are there aspects of the work that you showed that your parents maybe didn't know about, and you were the first one to reveal to them this, younger generation of Asian Americans, or because a lot of these people were your friends, so presumably your parents knew almost all of them.
Yeah, well, they don't know. They're mainly friends from New York, and they didn't really know my friends here in New York. My friends from San Francisco. Let's see. I think the entire process was, or the entire project was just a really learning experience for them. They probably had a glimpse here and there of different anecdotes or stories, but I really went through, image by image, and really talking about what I wanted to say with each piece. So I think really with each image was very much so a learning experience for them. I don't think there was one specific standout, but I think each image was just kind of one that was like, oh wow, that's interesting. Oh yeah, I can see how that was. So it's more of a learning process, which is fun too. That I could play a role in that.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I do have a question for you guys. It has to do with I feel like identity politics is such a big, I don't want to say it's trendy in the art world right now, but it also has to do with the millennial generation and social media. It's so much about me. World population's the largest it has ever been, so everyone's trying to find their little niche in the world. But I'm curious as to what you guys think when people label you guys as oh, you're the Asian artist, as if your work can kind of how some female artists get really upset when you label them as female artists. I'm just curious about, I don't know, thoughts on that.
I'm older than you guys, and my first job was at the Asia Society in New York, and it was interesting because the year I joined, actually the very day I joined was the same day that the curator for contemporary Asian art started. She's now the director at the Hirshhorn Museum, and she had this mandate to really show contemporary Asian artists, which before then Asia Society was kind of slow to do. So there were all these young Asian American artists who started showing, like Sarah Z, Shazia Sikander. I mean, the list goes on and on. And I don't know specifically who, but a lot of them would say, I don't want to be labeled an Asian artist. I'm just an artist. And it was interesting because, I'm like, you're showing at the Asia Society. So, there's we're all going to presume that you're an Asian artist. But there was also this feeling, and this was about 20 years ago, that, to be pigeonholed an Asian American artist meant that you were kind of in this ghettoized island in the art world. But this was before, this is when white artists, dominated museums and cultural institutions and all the collections. So it's a very different landscape now in some ways. But I will say, I'd be curious to see what those same artists think now today. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really difficult question and topic because, I mean, yes, there is a difference between me and a white man, but also it calls for some sort of, or it kind of alludes to trying to assimilate into westernized art by saying I'm just an artist. At the same time, making the distinction and saying that you're Asian American kind of draws a line between Asian art, Asian American art, which is not always the healthiest and not always the most progressive, even though it feels that way. So I think, I don't know, I think there's probably not a clear answer.
Yeah, I think for me, it's of course I want to be seen as an amazing artist, but at the same time, I am Asian American, and that's what informs my work, because my work is so deeply personal, and that's stuff that I know that I want to express, my feelings and emotions through. So definitely it informs my work, and there's no shame in being like, yeah, I'm an Asian American artist. But at the same time, I would hope that the work resonates, with non-Asian Americans, and for them to perceive me not just as an Asian American artist, but also a great artist as well. So I think there's different layers of it, and I can see kind of both sides. I wonder if almost there's this kind of middle ground where you can have a bit of both in terms of almost bending the kind of definitions.
Well, okay, here's some food for thought. I was messaging last night because I am very privileged to know a guerrilla girl. And I asked her because, the population of Asian Americans is about 5.6%. And, the guerrilla girls are all about data gathering, statistics, and, back in the day, they would go to the Met, right, and literally count who was on the wall and who was a woman and who was not. And they have much more sophisticated ways of doing that now. But I asked her, I said, did you guys ever do any data or tallying on Asian American artists represented in cultural institutions in the United States? And this woman, she's actually a retired Guerrilla Girl, but she's still very involved. And she said, no, they did not. She's also of Asian descent. But it makes me think and makes me wonder, like, there is actually no data about this, right? We don't know how many Asian artists are represented in museums across the United States, in encyclopedic museums, in specialty museums. But I think that that's one step that I would like to see going forward. There's one anecdote from you, Susan, where do you want to talk about this really quickly about your thesis advisors or your how you were trying to find 2 other women painters. Why don't you tell us?
Yeah. Well, I felt like it would be really great to have an Asian female, I don't know, painter or artist on my thesis committee. And, at school, we have had like several like group brainstorm sessions, and even just thinking about like the professors who have come into my studio. But yeah, I just realized like I've never had feedback from an Asian female like painter or so anyway, we tried like a lot of us tried to like we would sit down and be like, okay, let's come up with a list, and like we could only come up with like, I don't know, Lucy Liu who was one of the Charlie's Angels, and she paints now in Brooklyn. But like not a lot of people like off the top of my head. So that was a little disheartening, but yeah, it was just like a mini wake up moment.
Right, but it's not like there aren't Asian American, like Asian female painters.
Right. They're like out there. It's just we just don't know.
Identify them. So this is
the visibility is bad.
And you were looking at someone also who was perhaps doing like figurative painting and could be an advisor in terms of your portraits. Well, this leads us into like the last 5 minutes of our conversation. I wanted to ask each one of you about, during this time of xenophobia, all this rhetoric, Wuhan virus, China virus, we have all felt this need to act and to do something. What are your action steps? What is one that perhaps you feel like you can take with you and really commit to going forward? Someone take it away.
I can start.
Yeah.
I think one thing that, I would hope that people would take away or would encourage people to do is start and have a conversation with those close to you, whether it be a family or friends, and have a discussion about the things that are happening today, from the hate crimes to the rhetoric to even just talking about more kind of, or I guess deeper topics like the model minority myth and why that's harmful and how that plays a role in a lot of the hate crimes that we have in today. And just really sparking a conversation on that front. We don't necessarily all have like huge followings and audiences that we could broadcast these messages to, but I think we can all play a role in having a discussion with friends inside the Asian American community, outside of the Asian American community, on whatever terms that we feel comfortable with, whether it be a small group of people or family members, or even friends that are in the second degree. I think those are things that we can all really take away, and it's not really difficult to start or to do. And I would really hope that everyone can take that away and at least spark those type of conversations so we can spread that level of awareness in education to each other.
Yeah. I think piggybacking off of Andrew, I think we talked a little bit about education and kind of it being cyclical and not really leading to action steps, but I do think that because the system has kind of been made to function in this way, I think there's something to be said of going deeper, reading more. I think I don't want to assume about the audience today and what kind of what kind of access they have, but I think we could probably all read more and share more. I think I have not seen that many folks of non-Asian descent sharing articles or sharing interesting perspectives. I just and even, you know, we all fall prey to it, I think, because we have been brought up in Western society for the most part. We have like very imperialistic kind of points of views that are in us, and I think unlearning, reading more and sharing more is hopefully going to lead to some sort of understanding.
Yeah, I feel like, oh wait, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I feel like there's like three things that come to my head, and also like everything you guys have already said. And one, it's like really important for like community and solidarity right now, and especially since like Asian Americans as a population are usually like quite polite. You know, we don't like to protest, except for when our kids don't get into Harvard. I feel like that's the only time where I'm like, yes, I see you guys protesting now. So like a time for like Pan-Asian unity and like calling out issues or when you see something is wrong rather than staying silent. And also like to tell, like you guys were saying, to talk to your friends, but also to like when you have an opportunity to share your story. And I think like sharing your own story really like humanizes the situation and challenges like stereotypes or like how other people see Asian Americans, because it's like there's like theory and then reality, as like as like Andrew mentioned, in that actually there's like theory of like where Asian Americans come from, like the PBS documentary, but then like every person actually, like their immigration story is like so different and like can't even match up to like what we read in textbooks.
Thank you. And I will say, if any of you, well, when museums reopen, but Museum of Chinese in America, their permanent exhibition is really powerful, and they have lots of, you know, stories, kind of just narratives passed down from the very first travelers and settlers to New York of what that was like. I think going back into archives is really powerful, but you know, at the same time, I'd be curious to see if the three of you, I mean, Susan, you've already been painting yourself drinking Lysol, you know, I mean, that is just the moment. But I'm curious to see how artists right now take this moment and represent it. But that's not enough, right? I'm curious to see how curators and institutions and people who pick the artists to show take that work on as well. So it's, you know, you guys are there doing the work, but then there's additional work for how people are going to be showcasing and telling your stories. If anyone has questions, put them in. Noah had one question for you, Divya.
Yeah.
At any other point, did you ever receive messaging from your mom that supported assimilation? I'm curious to know about any mixed messaging and how you explore your own cultural identity through your work.
Yes. I mean, I think definitely. I think my mom, mostly my dad, but my parents are part of that model minority myth that Andrew was briefly talking about. I think a fine example of it is in the video game, and in that kind of barrage of texts about my hair. There was one that she said, what'd she say? You will look Dominican, which was meant to be the worst thing ever. And I think that comes from being a part of the model minority, being brought over here for a very specific purpose, which was to, you know, bring down brown and black people. So yes, I think there has always been mixed messaging in my life of when to assimilate, when to be Indian, when to not be Indian, when to be proud of it. Don't eat with your hands in public. Do not. But if you eat with a spoon at home, you've forsaken everything. What did you do? So yeah, I think that's just in our lives.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack, you know, especially when you're talking about your intergenerational stories. And it's certainly not a new one, you know, like many artists have kind of delved into this. But I think for you, what I love is the fact that you made it into a video game and that you created it in a media that is so specific to a certain generation. And probably one that your parents will never go out and play. I mean, they can't consume it in the way that, you know, most people would consume art. Was that intentional on your part?
Not in that way, though. I do think that's extremely interesting. Another thing I want to kind of point out about my personal journey with them is that I went to film school, and I put my foot down and I said, I'm going to film school. And it was something that they were supportive of. And I think using mediums such as video games or using mediums that are less accessible to them might be a little bit of like a subconscious barrier that I'm putting up between us as well. Yeah, but it was not purposeful in that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
Daniel Chen said, thank you so much for your time and talking and sharing your work. I think this is a question for everyone. This was touched on earlier related to the terminology Asian American artist. Can you also talk about the expectations or pressures to make a certain kind of work as an Asian American identifying artist?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big point of calling yourself Asian American is, again, like, who's the audience? Why are we titling ourselves in that way? It's because we are facing towards Western culture and we're creating that distinguishing between us and them, which is a shitty place to be in, but it is the world that we're in right now. I think that there's symbols and kind of archetypes that we'll fall into if we don't do the work to kind of undo what it means to be Asian American, and that could be through our work or outside of our work. But there's definitely pressure for stuff to trickle in, and I think it's our job to not do that.
I'll let the two of you speak, but I just want to say, I mean, I'm going to kind of speak for you, Susan, sorry. But, you know, when you showed at Spring Break Art Fair last year, the 2 spring breaks ago, and you exhibited the portrait, and, you know, Jerry Saltz posted on his social media accounts with your painting, and his caption said, you know, Asian Americans in Western portraiture are so rare. Which is true, but I actually, one of my colleagues from Asia Society days wrote, you know, she sent that to me and she said, that's crazy. I mean, Asians have been painting themselves in portraiture, maybe not in the way that you know, but, you know, this is nothing new. So here's a Western art critic, right, really applauding your work, but then again, taking it in this Asian American context. Did you have any feelings about that, or did you think about that at all?
Totally. I remember how when I was starting out, I was just painting essentially like paintings of my sister, you know, so it's like for me, I was like, no, it wasn't like I'm gonna paint Asians. It was more just like I'm painting my family members and people I know in my life, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that, you know, that was definitely a moment that's like, okay, what do you have control of in your studio versus how does the rest of the world read it? And especially like now with like all this pandemic stuff, it's going to be read like even more differently.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's like, as long as you're making honest work, you know, then maybe you don't have to worry about that too much. The other moment I remember was when I just have so many like landscape painting books in my studio, and someone was like, someone came into my studio and was like, why do you worship white male painters? And I was like, whoa. And then it was like, well, these are just the people who I learned about in like all of my time in education, from like middle school to high school. It's just like how education has been structured. You know, you start with like the Roman columns and you come all the way to, I don't know, modern art in the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
And like Asian art, or just like non-Western centric art, is not really part of that syllabus in a lot of schools, like even across the world, because it was like a lot of places were British colonies, and, you know, for a really long time. But then I was like, yes, what is my relationship to these white male landscape painters, you know? But I do think a part of me wonders, it's like, okay, I'm making all this work. Hopefully, like, I don't know, in 100 years or something, race will not be as, you know, I'd like to hope that the next generation of Asian American artists can paint whatever the hell they want and be read as just, you know, people, creative people making art, you know, like making beautiful things for the world.
I mean, what about you? What about you, Andrew?
Yeah, I think to kind of segue into that, like really my goal is to contribute to the Asian American archive and almost create that, you know, utopia where Asian American beauty and how it's represented is normalized. You know, it's not one of those things where it's like, whoa, it's another Asian like in Vogue or Asian model in Vogue or like in Paper Magazine, you know, or in any of these traditionally very kind of white fashion spaces. And also as a photographer, like being one of the few Asian American photographers talking about these types of issues as well, the hope is really to, like Susan talks about, be in a world where this kind of representation is at a point where we don't have to necessarily call out, you know, the fact that, you know, like Susan, your example, calling you as an Asian American artist, you know, painting portraiture. And I think really that's my goal as a photographer as well, is to be able to bring those types of different representations of beauty in the Asian American community to get to a place where it is a normalized beauty.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, if no one has any more questions, I can, you know, if anyone has any last parting thoughts, raise your hand. I just thank everyone so much for your time. I know coming out, getting on Zoom on a Sunday isn't awesome, but I felt like this was the best platform for a conversation. And this is just the beginning. I really think this is just the beginning. And I think all of you as young artists, but who have already done so much, you know, there's a lot for us to see in your growth, and I'm excited about that. And I just really am looking for more collaboration between all of you, like all of us on this group, not just the three of them, but all of us. Different communities need to come out and, you know, support each other. It's not, we're not in a silo, right? We're in a global world. And so just more and more of these would be great. And there are a lot of platforms now and conversations, especially in May because of you know, Asian American Heritage Month, that are doing these talks and lectures. And if anyone, you know, needs resources on that, you can DM me or send me a message. But I just appreciate all of your support, and to the artists, thank you. You guys have been great, and I hope we can all gather someday soon for Taj Mahals and other things.
That'd be great. Thank you, Yng, for organizing.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And it was so much fun to like be together on this and like see your work as well. I'm excited for you guys, like where you guys go.
Yeah.
And also for the people who joined today, for like, it's a Sunday and it's like really nice like that you guys are here because you guys care.
Yes, everyone cares. Everyone is awesome. Thank you, guys. Have a great rest of your Sunday, and I'll send an email with the recording of this later too. Bye, Yuri. Bye, Noe. Bye, everyone.